Today's sermon is called In the Center of Silence. Online, when someone writes a post, an article, or essay that's very lengthy, you often see a spot that says TLDR, too long, didn't read. And then it gives a quick summary. So here is the TLDR or Cliff Notes of today's sermon. In the center of silence, there is truth and wisdom. A lot has been said about silence. Speech is silver, silence is golden. Silence is the sleep that nourishes wisdom. Silence is a source of great strength. Silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything. Listen to silence. It has so much to say. Silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. And this month's theme is finding our center. So here are some quotes about centering. At the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are and know what you want. I have begun to think of life as a series of ripples, widening out from an original center. I want you to be everything that's you, deep at the center of your being. And this quote from activist Tarana Burke will lead us into the words of Cole Arthur Riley. If we don't center the voices of marginalized people, we're doing the wrong work. As I often do, I'm going to address my topic on a community level and on a personal level. When learning to write sermons, the advice is have lots of on-ramps. So I know that not everyone here is involved in social justice work and community building. So if you zone out for a bit, I understand, but there will be something for you as well. As indicated by the reading this morning, I started thinking about this sermon a month ago as Christians entered the time of Advent leading up to Christmas. There was a spark I wanted to capture in Riley's words about who becomes centered when others are silent. And this is what anchored my thoughts as I crafted this sermon. She points out that as one of Christians' most holy days approached, the day of the birth of their Savior, the voices that were being heard were those of women. And not just that, but in order to hear these voices, the men had to be quiet. Arthur says, silence is a divine recentering. To take up a virtue of silence is to also contend with all those whose voices typically take up so much space, and recenter the voices of the historically silenced. Listen. Silence is reclamation work. Looking through the community lens, silence as divine recentering asks us to look with a critical eye at the groups we belong to and participate in. If we are part of something that claims to be inclusive, diverse, welcoming, we must center the voices of people who have traditionally been excluded. We must ask who is at the table, whose voices are being paid attention to, and who needs to be silent so that other voices may be heard. Silencing dominant voices that get more than their share of airspace allows for broader and deeper truth and wisdom to be heard. Often in healing and justice work, we depend upon hearing these voices and the stories of those who are usually overlooked, those who are intentionally unheard. There are truths that need to be brought to the center. I think of the truth and reconciliation work in South Africa addressing apartheid, and the 94 calls to action by Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is addressing the atrocities of Indian residential schools. The first step is uncovering the truth and hearing the stories of those who have been hurt. This is one of the many ways the silence of those in power, those who have always had the proverbial microphone, can offer the center to others. Here in this center, we find truth. Centering marginalized voices also allows for deeper and broader wisdom. I remember being in a class in college on Mexican land reform. Our professor told us about some well-meaning white people who went to Mexico and built cement houses in a rural village, thinking they were helping to create structures for unhoused people. Upon returning months later, the concrete houses were full of chickens. College was many years ago for me, so the details are fuzzy. But what I took away was that the helpers never asked what the community needed or wanted. They made assumptions from their worldview. And it is not uncommon for people with power and privilege to assume they know best for others, and often actually fall short of helping. And as we face the many challenges our world has for us now, listening to other perspectives offers a diversity of answers. Is there something in Indigenous wisdom that could help us with our climate crisis? Author and activist Adrienne Marie Brown looks to the natural world, particularly mushrooms, to find wisdom on community engagement. Here in this center, we find wisdom. So pay attention to whose voices are being lifted up and listened to. Is it time for you to be silent, to allow space for recentering on hidden truths and deep wisdom? Is it your time to step into the silence so that you may be heard? Just like there are voices in our communities that need to be silent for other wisdom to be heard, so the same is true within ourselves. So here's the second on-ramp. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but take a moment to think about how you feel about silence. How much silence is comfortable for you? 30 seconds? 60 seconds? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Or maybe you're ready to leave us for the Quakers to sit in silence for an hour? Side note, I once took a group of middle school youth to a Quaker meeting as part of a UU religious education program. Most of them lasted less than 10 minutes. I imagine many of you would have raised your hand and said, silence, no thanks. In being a UU congregation, there are probably also some of you with a robust meditation practice who think, silence, bring it on. But for the majority of us, I think silence is still unsettling. Is there something we are afraid to hear if we really stop and listen? What happens when we quiet the constant chatter of our day-to-day lives? Might we find something we didn't know was there? This morning we heard the words, "Enter with me that still place within," the center, where we find not only our innermost selves, but also our connection to the farthest reaches of the universe. Many religious and spiritual traditions hold that there is a center to our being that is our true selves. It may be our soul, our Buddha nature, our divine spark. This center makes us unique and also connected to everything else. The center might hold our purpose, our identity. Perhaps our center holds the voices of our ancestors. Accessing the center and being grounded in it is part of what spiritual growth might look like. When I was studying for my spiritual director certification, one of the things we did was sit in a lot of silence. Sometimes we would pair up with another person, and there would be a prompt such as, "What does the divine look like?" And we would have 8 minutes. One person would answer, and the other person would listen. The listener was not allowed to respond at all. Even if the speaker didn't fill the 8 minutes, we would just sit there in silence until the time was up. So often, the speaker would jump in and fill the first minute or two, and then peter off. It was hard at first to be quiet and just allow silence to fill the space. But after another minute or two, often the speaker would have more to say. And this time it was deeper and more meaningful. The silence allowed that person to listen to their inner selves more attentively and answer from their true center. Our inner world can be seen as a reflection of our outer world. Our inner world has voices that take up a lot of space. It could be the voice of society telling us who we should be, what we should or should not do. It could be the voice of our family and their expectations for us. It could be the hum of TV or other distractions. There are all kinds of things going on inside of us that can keep us from hearing deep truth and wisdom. In my first marriage, I missed some red flags. There were issues in my relationship that pointed to us not being compatible. But I had some voices that were keeping me from hearing the truth that I was unhappy. I was afraid that if I let myself be quiet and listen to what was bubbling up from my sacred center, that I would have to face a huge upheaval in my life. I thought it was easier to listen to the voices in my head that said, "Save your marriage, save face, don't admit that you made the wrong choice, people will judge you. You should be able to make this work." And it wasn't until one night when I was alone and crying that I let all those voices that had been taking up so much space in my head fall silent. I was scared. But in that silence, the inner part of me, the one connected to God or spirit or universe, and also that is the core of who I am, spoke clearly. Here was the truth. When I first started studying to be a chaplain, I was doing my clinical pastoral education at a hospital in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There were a number of things that I was apprehensive about. Prior to this, I had never seen a deceased person. The hospital was very big, and I was worried about getting lost. I was intimidated by doctors. And I knew I was going to be asked to pray. Growing up UU, prayer was not part of my life. I knew that some people had specific prayers that they prayed, like the Our Father for Christians and Catholics with different endings, and the Fatiha for Muslims. And then there was extemporaneous prayer, where you just made it up on the spot. My peers helped me come up with a basic outline template for my extemporaneous prayer to give it a framework. Acknowledge the divine, address the patient's needs, strength, comfort, etc., and offer gratitude. This was going great. Until one night I was on call in the hospital all by myself and the pager went off. The page was from the labor and delivery unit. A patient had just come in, pregnant with twins, and her parents had both been killed in a motorcycle accident earlier that day. Oh no, I thought. I have no idea what to do in this situation. I met the patient and her husband in a dimly lit room and listened to her lamentations. My nice little prayer framework wasn't going to work here. So I sat silently. I connected to that part of me that is both my sacred being and that which is connected to all beings. And then I prayed. Even shortly after the visit ended, I had forgotten what words I had said, or really that they had even come out of me. Here was wisdom. In my first notes for this sermon, I included the quote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are weak. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us." We asked ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? And I was thinking about what we might be afraid to hear if we quieted our minds. There are some of us whose deepest fear is that we are weak. A fear that our belief that we are worthless will be confirmed if we allow silence to speak. And there are those that are afraid that the universe might ask more of them, have more in store for them. And there are some of us who are afraid that if we stop even for a moment, everything will spiral out of control. There are some of us who are afraid there will be nothing in the silence at all. But I say to you, as scary and uncomfortable as it might be, taking time to be in silence and to listen to what is at the center of our beings can bring truth and can bring wisdom if we let it. So may it be.